Right, we welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is a show where we profile a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. In each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and unique manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and thought about by the guest on our show. Today's guest, Shagufi, is someone I've admired for a really long time as a teaching colleague and professional. We went to the same teaching college program in London, Ontario, at Western University, and that's where we crossed paths. But just a little bio about Shagufi before we jump into this conversation. Shagufi is a year two B.Ed teacher candidate at Western University in London, Ontario. She graduated from York University with an honors BA in English literature. Her interests include reading, cooking, watching films, and spending time with her family. As an aspiring educator, Shagufi aims to empower students to find their strengths and create positive change within themselves and subsequently the world around them. She considers herself a lifelong learner and looks forward to what the future holds. And that's such an amazing bio, Shagufi. I really like how you spoke about yourself in such a simple and straightforward way. But I know you're training to be a teacher today. But the question I always have for a fellow teacher is, what was your experience being a student at school? Like, because you must have observed over 15 different teachers over so many different years. So, what were you like as a student growing up?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for asking me to be on Learning Stories. I've watched a few of them, and I'm truly humbled that you thought of me when you were thinking about this. So, thank you for that. And as far as being a student, so I've always loved school. There has never been a day where I've woken up and thought I don't want to go to school today. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way I was brought up, the environment around me. So thankfully, 99% positive experiences in school. Going into my background a bit before I tell you what kind of a student I was. So I was actually born in Punjab, a state in India, and my parents immigrated to Canada in 2001.
Mm.
So I was around 4 years old, and in India, I was in like nursery, so like preschool. And then when we came here is where I started like my official schooling from junior kindergarten onwards. And so every year I just remember having such wonderful teachers and I felt so supported every single year. It was so exciting. And I had these adults who really wanted to just instill a love of learning within me. And so I think the idea of me being so comfortable in a school environment is what made me love it so much. Um, and now that I look back at all my schooling, I think it's probably because there was also like a sense of belonging.
Mhm.
Subconsciously, the 4 year old me who came from India to Canada probably missed that sense of belonging because we're the only family from both my dad's side and my mom's side who are here.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a lonely few like a transition period. And so when I went to school, I got that community again. I got that sense of belonging and love. Everything that I had left, I found it somewhere else. So I gravitated more and more towards it. And I think that's just where all the love stems from.
Mhm.
And then also, my mother being a professor probably has a lot to do with that. My dad really believing in hard work probably has a lot to do with everything. So the love of school all comes from there. And then, how was I as a student? To go back to the question, I used to actually get like, when teachers send letters home saying like, oh, your child was a pleasure to have in class. It
Mhm.
sounds so weird to like compliment myself, but I used to get letters home saying your daughter was amazing, and it would make me feel great. It would make my parents feel great. And so one thing led to another, and now I'm here.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think, yeah, I completely relate to that. And I think I went through something similar when I moved here for university. And um, especially when you're moving to a new country and a new culture, there's a lot you have to process with regards to understanding your identity and your role in this new context and environment. And I'm so glad that school, was that sense of community for you. And I truly believe that teachers play such an important role in making that happen. I know we're going to, jump into that conversation about the importance of teaching in your life. And you mentioned something about, your parents, Shagufi. I was curious about, their influence on, your worldview and your perspective towards learning. Your mother being a professor, and even your father's influence on your thinking. So, what were some things you felt you learned from them growing up? I mean, specifically in terms of their approach to life or their approach to learning and their individual professions.
So, as I said, my mother was a professor of Punjabi literature. Later on, she was a principal, and then my father was an engineer in India. When they came here, they had to take up odd jobs, as the typical immigrant story. But what I have always seen in my parents, both of them, is a willingness to always be ready to learn and to learn more. I don't think I've ever seen them at any stage in their life where they have closed themselves off from learning.
Mhm.
Um, and so seeing that it was, the little child within me always saw, wait, if they can do it, I can do it too. Like, if they're so passionate about books and literature and poetry, and they're still able to keep that alive in their lives, having so much on the side happening, then I can do it too. And so that was definitely something. I can think of actually a few specifics. So when we came to Canada originally, we were in Toronto. We were in the Jane and Finch area actually. And at that time, the library closest to us was a branch of the Toronto Public Library. And I have this vivid memory in my head of being a really, really young girl and my mom taking me to the public library to get a library card. And although the memory is a little bit fuzzy, it's still like I still get so emotional thinking about it, because it was one of those times in my life where it truly just felt exhilarating. Like I was this tiny little girl, and I looked up at this side and that side, and there was just rows and rows of books. It felt like I was like in a heaven of some sort. So I think her being so keen on like making sure myself, and then later on my younger brother, have like library cards, have access to books, education, any sort of learning that we want, probably played a big role in the way I am today.
Mhm.
um, and my dad too, he's always reading like professional development books, and even though he's never sat us down and said, okay, you need to read, it's good for your mind, it'll open you up to new ways of thinking. I think children always learn by seeing what their parents do rather than what we're told as children. So them setting that example for me has been really important in my life.
That's amazing, and that's so important. I really like what you said about how we as children observe what our parents do, and that influences our perspective of their influence in our life as well. That's beautiful. I'm thinking about the other adults in your life at this point. As someone that's taken up teaching full time now. Were there any teachers in junior school or middle school or high school that you remember for for some reason? Maybe they took a particular interest in you. Maybe they taught a subject in a particular way. Maybe one or two teachers or stories of learning experiences that had an impact on you.
Of course, there are countless. I've truly just been so blessed to have, just the ability to even say there are countless teachers that have been such pivotal people in my life, such important people in my life that have mentored me is a huge thing on its own. But one that always comes to mind, a personal favorite of mine. I don't think if he ever watches this, I don't think he'll be offended if I say his name. It was Jason Engel. He was, well, Mr. Engel to me at that time. He was my 10th grade English teacher. And with Mr. Engel, it was more so that I truly felt so comfortable in his classroom. And I don't know, looking back, whether it was the way he taught, maybe the kind of person that he was, but what I do know is I felt excited to go into his classroom every day. And I think a particular reason to that also could have been that I had my first kind of like spark of literature come alive in me in his classroom. So I remember we did this, it was like a cumulative project at the closer to the end of the year where we had to pick a novel and then we do a presentation on it. And I remember that he gave us choice. And I know we learned so much about that, you and I, in, whether it be Western's Faculty of Education program or just even going forward in our teaching careers, we're always taught give children voice, give them choice in the classroom. And that's what he was doing. He said, so there's this project coming up. You can choose any novel that you want as long as it's approved by me. And then you can choose the basis of like how you want to do your presentation, what you want to focus on. And when that happened, I chose this novel called The Lovely Bones. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It actually got turned into a movie later too. I didn't watch the movie because I think it would be a bit too much for me, but a lovely novel. And I did my presentation, and I just remember throughout the end thinking, this was so much work. It was so hard. I spent day and night doing this, but I had the time of my life. It was so hard, but the process of me going from step one to the end was so much fun
Mhm.
because I don't know where this like connection came from me to the story, but whatever happened in all of that time just made me feel like when one story ends, I want to know what the next story is that I'm reading. And then when that one ends, I want to know what the next one is. So, because of him, I feel I was able to get this feeling within me.
Yeah, I love that feeling, just and I feel really indebted to the people that introduce you to reading and build that love for you, because you have a safe space in books that you may not always have in real life. And it was beautiful that you found that in that particular book. But thank you for sharing that story, Shigufi. I think that it's amazing to just reflect and remember. And it's hard for teachers to really understand the long-term impact they have on your life, right? But the fact that you're able to remember this particular incident says a lot about Mr. Engel's influence on your life. But what was that transition for you like with regards to high school and university? This is a challenging decision for a lot of students. Were there certain subjects or electives you took in high school and your experience in that program that led to you deciding your major in university? How did you, navigate that path of high school to university?
So thankfully, there has never been any other subject that I've been so pulled towards other than English.
Mhm.
When applying to university in grade 12, I only applied to two programs. It was either English literature or history because my marks in history were up to par. So I thought if not this, then maybe that will be my backup per se. Um, but the transition itself, uh, I don't want to downplay it, because transitions are always tough in their own way, because you're going from one place to another, one world to a completely new world. But I do believe it was fairly smooth for me. And I say that because I was in a different program in high school. I was in the IB program. And so the way we were taught in our classes, the way teachers had expectations of us were extremely similar to those of like what my professors expected of me in university.
Mm.
And so I think my mind and just the way I was thinking was already set up in that way. And so when it came time for first year, it didn't feel like there was a big difference.
Mm.
But I will say the big, other than academic wise difference, was all of a sudden it was one tiny world, high school in my neighborhood to going to university where there's people from all walks of life, people I have never seen before, a whole different world. Once again, I feel like the little girl in the library. I'm really small and everything around me has just gotten bigger. But all in a good way, all in a very exciting and positive way.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think because universities are such, I mean, there's so much to learn and so
Yeah.
many different people from so many walks of life to who actually come in and enter your life. Um, like I know learning in university is very different from learning in school, right? Shagufi, and based on your experience in that program, I know you did a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, which is a 4-year program at York University. You know, I mean, what suggestions or tips or advice you'd have for someone that is pursuing a similar program to get the most out of the program? You know, what are some things you think they can do in terms of like reading or prep work or collaboration or networking that you think would be beneficial to someone in a similar position like you um, then?
Yes, definitely. Um, I I have this as a teaching philosophy now, and so refer to it. I always say that if your students are well, they're able to do well. So be well and do well. And so I think the first step should always be you have to take care of your health. If you are physically sitting in a classroom, however, you're mentally not there, it's you might as well just sit home, because you're not absorbing everything that you should. And sometimes it's not the fault of the student who's sitting in that class and they're mentally not there, because there's external factors that may be playing a role in that. I know for me in university, there were also a few things that happened in my personal life, family wise, things that make it truly hard to focus on whatever is important in your life at that moment. So if I am looking back in my program, I placed a really, really big focus on making sure that I was okay.
Hmm.
Um, I needed to be able to think straight to do my work, because for me, the first 2 years of university went by really well. And then when third year started, things started getting a bit shaky. And that's when I it was reflected in my grades, my performance. Um, and yeah, so just to sum all that up, maybe we can touch on that later, but to sum it up, I will say take care of yourself. There is nothing more important in your life than your health. Secondly, I would say this is also a non-academic advice. I would say keep a journal. I kept a personal blog, if you will, like a virtual diary of everything from my first day of undergrad to the last day when I graduated. And just yesterday, actually, I was looking back at everything and looking for like how was I thinking during first year compared to third year. And it's amazing the growth you're able to see physically written out. I also included pictures. So it's just wonderful to look back at. So keep a journal. You're going to be so happy that you did. And so academically, I will give one academic piece of advice. Office hours are everything. I did not take advantage of office hours because I didn't know exactly what they were. I didn't understand why teachers had office hours until very late. And so, even if you don't have questions about the content you may be learning in class or questions about an assignment, go get to know your professors, chat, introduce yourself, tell them how you're liking the class. And just that tiny interaction of maybe even 5 minutes out of your day will make such a big difference, because now in an auditorium of all these people, the professor may be able to recognize your face and say, oh yeah, that was the girl yesterday who came to ask me so and so. And it really does help in the long run. So go to office hours.
Yeah, I that's amazing. I completely agree because it's hard for a professor. I think in university classrooms, you have much bigger student bodies, and you have like 300 students in a class. So for you to really, get that professor's one-on-one time, I think office hours are like a great opportunity. And I subscribe to what you said in terms of looking after yourself. And I think I've realized that a lot more during the pandemic more than any other time. Personally, it was not a very easy time for me. And I think it was the same for so many people from different backgrounds, not just teaching professionals, and I think students also would have, been affected by, all the changes that we saw come into the world at that point. And, like one simple story off the top of my head was just seeing my middle school students being separated in rows, and the lack of opportunity for them to collaborate and
It's
yeah,
heartbreaking as a teacher. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, and I'm just reflecting on your experience as well. I love the idea of a journal. Uh, I think it's powerful that you were able to do that for such consistently, for such a long period of time, because I think you can actually look back at who you were then and read a note, and sometimes you're surprised by your own thoughts at a
Yes,
particular point.
definitely. Mhm.
So I thanks. That was really really nice, Shagufi. Um, and once you were done with university, did you decide to take up other professional opportunities, look for a job, or was it in that third and fourth year where you realized that you wanted to do another program or spend some more time in university? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so from as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to go into teaching, in the stream of education. And so when I entered my program of English literature, I knew right after I wanted to go to the 2-year teaching program. However, sometimes life happens, and there are situations out of your control that kind of they like all of a sudden you have a timeline for how you expect things to go, and because of whatever things are happening, everything is just out the door. And so I've learned also, just on a side note, timelines are not good for anybody. Don't have timelines, because things will all happen as they are meant to, and things will unfold all in due time.
Mhm.
And so uh, I'll go back to third year, when I remember how I said that things were getting a little shaky at that time. So in third year is when my nanaji passed away, my nanu, my maternal grandfather. And all of a sudden, this was like the first major passing away of anyone in my life. And so it felt like life had changed from 1 minute to the next. Everything just felt really shaken up. My mom booked a ticket to India, and she had to leave right away to be with her family. And it was just a period in my life where I thought, wow, like I've never experienced emotions like this before. And it was really hard. But what was able to get me through it was my family coming together and remembering all these wonderful things about my nanu, and us realizing that, you know what, he had this wonderful long life. He inspired so many people. He truly did leave a legacy, and for that we are forever grateful. And so because his death happened in a peaceful way, we weren't shaken up as much as we could have been. So we're thankful to God for that. And so that happened in third year. And just as I was getting over that, we were in the middle of a move. So moving from one place to another. And right as we moved, my mamaji, so my mamu, my mom's brother,
Mm-hmm.
he came to live with us because his cancer had come back, and he had throat cancer. And so he was the only one here. He didn't have like a wife or kids. And so my mom was like, come here with us, we'll take care of you. And so we're still getting over Nanu passing away. Mamu comes to live with us. Everything is fine, and we're hoping for the best. But every single day just keeps getting worse. And although I know that my mom, now, she probably didn't want to expose me to any of this. She probably didn't want me to even know that it was getting worse. I knew it was getting worse because I also physically saw it in my mom, because she was taking care of him 24/7. And I could see it on her face that, like, I saw my mom, but she was physically in front of me, but it felt like her soul was just not there.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very traumatic time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I remember in fourth year, I also dropped 2 courses in university. And so after everything that happened, and then it was around Christmas time. Christmas is one of my favorite times of year. A year later, mom was still here, but we had to rush him to the hospital. And he unfortunately had passed away. And it just, it's tough.
I'm so
It's,
sorry to hear
no,
that.
no, it's fine. Yeah, it was a tough time. So because of that, I know you mentioned the program was 4 years, but it actually took me five, because everything that happened. And then I dropped those 2 courses, and just my luck. Actually, no, I shouldn't say it that way. Everything happens for a reason. York went on strike. So I dropped those 2 courses. York went on strike, and the university was completely shut down.
Wow.
And I had to step into a fifth year to finish those 2 courses.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And so uh, trying to manage everything happening at home and trying to be strong and also trying to excel in your academic life all of a sudden became really hard.
mm-hmm.
And that's why my decision was, after all of this ends, after I graduate, I need time.
Yep.
I need time to collect myself and to almost process everything that has happened, and to understand why things happen they do,
Mm-hmm.
and to just let myself be for a little bit. And that's why I didn't start the teaching program until 2 years later.
Got it.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of a transition period in between undergrad and this.
Kudos to you, Shagufi, for, just checking in with yourself and giving yourself that time. I think health is something that, we have no control over, right? And it also shows you how fragile life is and how we can take so many things for granted on a day-to-day basis. And thank you for being so honest and sharing that story with us, because I think it's such an important part of your own journey and your own evolution as a human being. And I, I think one of my close relatives once told me that we are not only defined by the highest points in our life, but we're also defined by um, the challenges, and
So true.
sometimes, and building on, I think it just made you who you are today. And I'm just trying to empathize with what you must have gone through, and I truly believe, and feel like giving you like a big hug, and I think that.
No, the sentiments are coming through it. I thank you for being so empathetic. It was a character building experience. It was an experience that was necessary. It opened me up to death being a reality. Um, it was, I say it was necessary. I wouldn't go through it again,
Mhm.
but it was needed. And I think it's important to honor what you've been through. It's important to speak about these things because I still think that there is a little bit of a taboo surrounding, just vulnerability in people's lives. And not a lot of people like to speak about things that they've been through for valid reasons, of course. But
Yeah.
you must honor things that have happened to you because it, you wouldn't be the person you are today if you hadn't seen every single event and circumstance.
Yeah.
So it was tough, but I'm here today, and by the grace of God, things are good.
Yep. And I think I'm so excited for you, and your path ahead. And as a teacher, as a fellow teacher, I think, um, yeah, I think you're just going to be such a wonderful teacher for them in their lives, because you will be able to see through the goods and the lows. And I think each student really wants that at every point in their life. And I know you've been at the Bachelor of Education program at Western, and I now that you're in the program, I know, I've been following your blog. I know Shagufi mentioned that she had a blog for her undergraduate experience. She also has a wonderful blog for her experience at Teachers College that I have been regularly reading. And
You.
so I wanted, I mean, I do know about your experience from that blog, but for the viewers and the listeners, many of whom will be colleagues and family members in your own life, if you had to talk about your first year in the program, I know you're going into your second year now. There's so much happening in Teachers College. I feel like the first year is just a huge influx of information, but the other challenging part of doing Teachers College was also doing it during the pandemic, or the aftermath of the pandemic. So, how do you, like, if you had to become a teacher in Ontario, how do you go about being a teacher in Ontario? I think we can start off with that question and then go into your experience at Teachers College from there.
Of course, I think that's a wonderful question. So much has happened, as you said, in these past few years with the COVID, the pandemic, things constantly opening, shutting down again. Forget the impact that it's had on us as adults, like the children. These are the pivotal years in their life where they are big, like growing into themselves, and it's almost like they've been robbed of that childhood experience. And it's very disheartening to me because I think about that time in school that they would have otherwise had doing all these amazing things and all these activities, and they didn't. And so now the responsibility, I firmly believe, is on people like us, you and I as educators, to make sure that in one way or another they're able to get some part of that learning back. Because, see, I don't want to say missed out, because missed out implies that there is something that they could have done which they didn't have an opportunity to do. But I feel that we need to, it's our responsibility to ensure that they have a childhood that they feel comfortable in,
Mm.
right? And there's even small things like They used to have groups and then they sit in rows and they're so isolated from one another. And so, what are strategies that we can use as educators to make sure that they still have connections within the classroom, even within those rows? So,
Mm.
just little things like that, and being empathetic with students, not worrying about, okay, something is overdue by a week. Why hasn't someone handed that in? Unless it's time for like report cards and you need marks, I understand. But you don't know what's happening in someone's life. When I was an undergrad, my professors didn't know why I all of a sudden stopped participating in classes because my mind wasn't there.
Mm.
And so you need to be able to put yourself in the shoes of a student and say, if they're not talking, it's because of something else happening. If I'm giving it my hardest and I'm trying so hard to be engaging and to empower them, but it's not working,
Mm.
sometimes it's not you, sometimes it's just external things. So being patient and empathetic with your students is important.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And I think that is something that's underrated, in terms of student development. And I know there's an emphasis on social emotional learning in both the public and private system right now. But I think encouraging students to speak about what they're going through when they're comfortable to do so. I think schools should be safe places for children to express their minds, and I think it's not just about academic development. I think social and emotional development is as important in a student's life. Um, Thanks for sharing that, Shagufi. And I know in Ontario, if you do want to be a teacher, you apply to a 2-year teachers program, or some schools have concurrent programs. But I know you opted for the 2-year program, and once you finish the program, you do get a license from a teaching body called the Ontario College of Teachers. But what do you learn in Teachers College? What are some of the courses you take, and how do you move from being someone that knows nothing about teaching to someone that becomes a competent practitioner in the classroom? Just for other people that are interested in the profession and are curious about the pathway to get there based on your experience.
Of course. So we know this, but for the people that may be watching that are unaware, when you go into teachers college, there's streams that you choose. So you're either in primary junior, junior intermediate, or intermediate senior, depending on what grade you want to teach. And I believe you were IS2, right? Yes,
Yes.
we were both intermediate senior because we want to teach older students. But within each of those streams are different courses catered to bettering you in your profession as a teacher. So for me, my subjects were English and social science. Were yours the same?
Yes, we had
Yeah,
the same subjects. Yeah,
we're so similar. I'm uncovering more similarities as we go, but
I know, because I know
yeah.
we do have that background in terms of a BA in English literature too.
Yeah.
But
And so, depending on what your courses are, you obviously take the core subjects. So, if I'm teaching English, I need to be able to know content. And so, in English, they will give you examples of like what kind of units you can do with your students, what kind of things in the curriculum, in the Ontario curriculum, should you touch on to ensure that they get a wide range of topics covered. So, aside from just the core courses that you're meant to be teaching, we also have classes that focus on classroom management, on if your specialization is in like international education, you learn how to instill global mindedness within your students. You learn strategies to ensure that their social emotional well-being is taken care of within classrooms. So although these things may, looking from the outside in, you think, wouldn't any adult just know how to do that with a student? But then when you actually go into the classroom and you're learning all these things, it's a lot more nuanced than you would think it is. And there's a lot of little details that you have to ensure that you're aware of. One of the courses that I really liked was the special education course, which we will dive deeper into in second year. But things like how to accommodate a student who may have a different learning style.
Mm.
If a student is not able to put their thoughts into words, what are the strategies to use to ensure they're still successful in their class? So little things like that. Um, I think Western has amazing courses. I may be a little bit biased because we both have experience from there, but great classes. They teach you a lot.
Yeah, I know the academic courses are some things that you learn a lot from, but I know you also have a component called the practicums where you spend some time in an actual classroom under an experienced professional. Looking back on my experience, I think those were the experiences that really defined me as a teacher. I just felt so grateful to get the opportunity to sit in another teaching professional's classroom. I know medical professionals do this where you shadow a competent surgeon. Similarly, when you want to become a teacher, you spend some time in the classroom of a teacher that's already teaching the subject you want to teach, and then they slowly transfer responsibility onto you. I know it gradually gets increases where you start off with fewer responsibilities in your first practicum and then are given more teaching and planning responsibilities in your third and fourth. So, when because this was probably the first time you were entering a classroom as a teaching professional, what were some of the things you observed in your practicum without taking names just to protect the students and the teachers in that situation. But what were some things you observed, Shagufi, that defined your approach to teaching? And do you think that at the end of your first year, you have a conceptualization of what your philosophy of teaching would be?
Yeah, definitely. In my teaching philosophy has changed at least 80%, I would say. Do
Wow.
you remember in the social foundations course how they make you write up a teaching philosophy?
Yes.
I wrote that and then I went to my first practicum and everything was out the window because all of a sudden I was exposed to these new students and new ways of learning. And I'm thinking, this is not what I had in my mind. But it was also wonderful because now I know how things are in like the quote unquote real world, and my teaching philosophy in the beginning, when I didn't have that practicum experience, was focused highly on it, like, my old IB state of mind where it's, I want to focus on making my children all rounders. And I want to make sure that they've touched all aspects of life and they're excited to learn. But then you go into a classroom where it's not IB learners, it's learners who may be in like a workplace English class and they're, first of all, the excitement of the subject just isn't there, which
Mhm.
makes it very hard. And then all of a sudden, you have learning disabilities, you have IEPs that you have to accommodate, you have students who would do anything to run out of that classroom because they just do not like that subject.
Mhm.
But then you have to think about it and you have to find ways to get them excited. One
Mhm.
of my ATs told me, she was like, if you are not excited about the subject you're teaching, what makes you think that they're going to be excited? And
Mhm.
it was like a reality check for me where, so I won't take any names, obviously, but we were focusing on, in grade 10, they do like a plot graph
Mhm.
of like, so this is what happens, and then there's a climax, and then there's falling action. And so that's what I was teaching. And for me, it was just, I didn't enjoy the content because it was so dull. And
Mhm.
it probably came across as I was teaching it because I was just standing there lecturing and I wasn't moving around. And
Mhm.
in that moment, I had forgot that there are kids who don't know what a plot graph is, who don't know the importance of learning why a story goes from one end to another, and why it's important to dive into those details and to truly understand what happens in a story. And so from that practicum onwards, my thing was, you cannot teach as if, you know, you are learning the content yourself. You have to put yourself in the student's shoe and think, okay, this is new. How do I make it interesting for them? How do I make it so that they want to sit through the class?
Mm.
And so, with the help of my AT, I discovered new strategies and new and exciting things, and I'm getting better at it.
Yeah, it's so nice to hear you talk about this because I went through the exact same experience, you know, in my first practicum, I was just, practicum is just another word for a teaching placement in teachers college. And an AT, for anyone listening, is an associate teacher who you work with on this practicum placement. But I was so lost. I thought I was such a good teacher. And
Me
then
too.
I go into my first classroom and I was doing everything wrong, you know. And I think my first AT was very kind, and critical in a constructive way, which I think I really needed at that point, you know, because I was moving from a university setting, and I would often, you know, recreate lessons I was learning in university and talking in a style that I was comfortable with in the classroom, which I didn't think was always fair for, you know, the kids. But I also, you know, found it challenging, just doing new content. You know, when you're teaching something, in a lot of ways you should have also somehow mastered and learned it yourself to be able to explain it in the most simple way possible, you know. And I think I was not doing a lot of that in my first practicum. I would just take lessons and unit plans and PPTs and try, you know, regurgitating the same information, which I think is not a very I don't think it's the greatest way to do it. And I think you need to evolve. And this is personally my own reflection. I was just thinking about what you said, your own approach. And that's another thing I also realized, Shagufi. I don't know if you feel the same way, is that eventually you need to get to a point where you develop your own teaching style, you know, and your own understanding of what a classroom should look like. You know, you don't have to completely subscribe to the views of another senior teacher, because they're going to be teaching things based on their background and their experiences. You know, for me in my classroom, I think identity is such an important part of how I teach, and that not only involves you being a student in my classroom, but also your cultural identity, your sexual identity, your gender identity. I feel like there are so many facets to our understanding of who we are, and until someone feels comfortable that all these sides of their identity are accepted, or they have a space to maybe bring out these facets of their identity. I feel like learning cannot really happen in the most constructive way possible. You know, so I feel like such a big part of teaching well is about building those relationships right at the start of the year. And I know you're going into your second year, so your teaching philosophy may change so much. And I hope I get to chat with you again. And you know, just for the last 5 to 10 minutes, you know, I wanted to, you know, get to know you more as a person beyond your academic journey and your professional journey. In your bio, you mentioned you love reading books. I know you have an amazing cooking page on Instagram that has some great recipes, and I know that's something you're very passionate about. And films are also something you really like. So maybe if you could, you know, tell me about a book, a film, and maybe the influence of you know, food and cooking in your life, just for me to get an understanding of you beyond the classroom.
Of course. The cooking page I initially started in that transition between finishing at York to starting Teachers College. So in those 2 years, I wasn't doing much, and so I needed something to do. And cooking was always fun because as a child I would like stand up on a chair while my mom was cooking and like trying to recreate whatever she was doing. And so I like making food look nice, like the visual presentation of it, the aesthetic of it. And so I love the like when the cooking process is done, finding like what bowl will this look nice in, or so that's just a little part of my life that it keeps me excited and happy. As far as books and films are concerned, I love reading biographies, my
Okay,
absolute favorite thing to read. I'm not so much into fiction.
got it.
I like real stories. I like knowing how people's lives have unfolded because I feel that once you've read all these stories, it's like you've lived 1,000 lives without
Mhm,
actually having lived 1,000 lives.
for sure.
And so I've loved, um,
Maybe
I've,
one book that you would highly recommend.
oh, this is the hardest question ever because there is never just one book. I would be doing injustice to all the other books. I will say, as of recent, I read a memoir called From the Ashes by Indigenous author Jesse Thistle.
Mhm.
It was amazing. It I had to pause in between because it's just such a powerful book. And I had to take time to really reflect on what I was reading. It's an emotional one, but it's a page turner. So I definitely recommend it to anybody. And
Amazing. In
film
terms of, yeah,
wise, yeah, I know that we're both really into Hindi cinema and Bollywood.
yes, I love films. Yeah, go ahead.
I I really loved watching movies. I say loved because I don't think that they're up to par now. But I loved the older ones like Lagan, Veer Zara. I loved Chak De India with Shahrukh. I loved what else? I loved Three Idiots.
Mm.
And all of these like the films like that are the ones that you remember even like 10, 15 years after watching them. And what's great is like you remember the soundtrack of them too because they were just that amazing. The most recent ones I don't feel like they've done that for me, like they haven't fulfilled what I'm looking for inside, but I really enjoyed watching. I watched Gangubai in theaters with my mom. That was a really good one.
Yeah, it's a powerful one for sure.
83 was also really good. Really sad that it tanked at the box office, but it was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love films because my father had this ritual where every Thursday he'd go for a film after work, and he'd take me along, and that's where I think I developed this love for just cinema. And I think, like, books and films give you some moments where you can actually go and live in the shoes of another individual. Um,
Definitely.
I feel like doing that, you also experience some of the emotions and some of the experiences in that particular person's life. And I feel like, I don't know if it's true, like neurologically, you have these mirror neurons where you're mirroring and sort of the same thought process that the characters go through. And I know both of us have studied English literature, and I think that's what I feel books can do for kids. I think you can travel so many different journeys and have so many different experiences with this simple basic skill, and um, yeah, I thank you for sharing all of that. I just want to be respectful of time, and I really wanted to thank you, Shagufi, for giving me this opportunity to chat with you. I know if I have the same conversation with you 3 or 4 years down the line, it's going to be very different, and you'll have so many more experiences to share. But going back to the vision of this show or this podcast, I really believe that learning is not something that happens only within the classroom. It happens beyond the classroom as well. And through your story, I think as a friend and colleague, I have learned that there is so much more to an individual than just the degrees or the professional achievements in their life. And I think you know just the bravery and the honesty that you have shown. It's just commendable and very inspirational for someone else on the same path. So thank you for that. Anything you'd like to share before we close the show, Shigufi?
Yes, yes, definitely. First off, the pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much for asking me to do this. It was such a good experience, and I completely agree. If we do this a few years down the road, the conversations will be vastly different. Even, I think 6 months down the road, like you are growing and evolving every single day. And I'm really excited to do this once my practicums have finished again. So even if it's just a casual chat between us, I know that things are going to sound very different, but all in the best way. So thank you so much. And one thing I would like to say, you just in the role of an interviewer remind me so much of the film companion interviews with Anupama Chopra. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Those,
I do.
yeah, absolutely amazing. And I don't know if it's the mannerisms or what it is, but so similar with her, because I feel like she respects the other person's story and she lets them fully explain everything. And you are a wonderful listener. So thank you for listening and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this.
That's so sweet. Thank you, Shagufi. And for the listeners, I will be linking Shagufi's Twitter profile and her blogs as well. Please do reach out to her if you have, if you want to extend this conversation. I don't think 1 hour is enough to really get to know a person. She will be documenting her journey in her second year of the program. And there are going to be some wonderful posts on that blog coming up in the near future. And for the listeners, again, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, keep learning and stay tuned for more such wonderful episodes and wonderful stories from this show.